Hey guys, in the last few videos I made on the M16A4, I saw a lot of remarks about how to get the M5 rail adapter system because they're pretty hard to get these days. Rather than to give you my life story about how I went about getting this rail, I'll just summarize this entire video here with this table. Basically, here are your options, and unfortunately right now the pickings are a little slim. I got a little depressed making this table, just seeing how many things are out of stock. But here's what I would suggest. You can go to any of these retailers and sign up for in-stock notifications and just be very quick when you finally get the notification that these are back and available to purchase. You can also take the route of buying through a private seller through either Gun Accessories for Sale, which is on Reddit, which I've never used but I know is popular, or you can use Gun Broker, which is what I did. Granted, I got mine 5-6 years ago. Another thing you can do also is buy them from Expo Arms or Midwest Industries. The thing is though, those aren't actually clone correct. They are proprietary rails which will work, but they're not going to be Knight's Armament and they're not going to be from P&S products. The last and most extreme route you can take if you haven't started building your clone yet is just to buy the entire rifle where the rail comes with it. Now, understandably, some may not want to do this because you're spending $2,000 when all you really needed is the rifle. However, if you haven't started your clone build at all, this is an option, but it is the most expensive route. Now, it's a bit of a shame, but I can't just give you the secret sauce on where to get it. Unfortunately, I think there's going to have to be some patience here, but you know, when you get it, it'll finally be worth it. So even if none of these are in stock, which really does suck, hopefully some of this helps you and gives you some more options that maybe you haven't thought of. With that in mind, this basically summarizes the entire video. If you want to keep watching, stay tuned to watch me actually shoot my M16A4 and ramble a little more about the rail and why I still think it's a practical choice today, even if obviously people mostly use it for cloning. Also, if you do choose to stick around, I do have a question for you guys. In terms of future content for the M16A4 and the M4A1, those kind of military style clone guns that I make, what other content do you want to see? Are there any topics that you would like me to touch on or any kind of things you want me to make into a video? Let me know what you think. I'd be happy to take your ideas and make a video out of them. And with that being said, let's head to the range so you can watch me shoot while I talk about the rail. So as you can see, I went back to the range recently and I was able to shoot the M16 clone again. Really been liking this, and it's been a little bit of a phase that I've been getting back into. Now, even though the range was pretty empty, I happened to get off work and go on a weekday. Unfortunately, I still only got 100 yards to shoot at, but it was still fun anyway. Just been using the ACOG shooting steel targets and a little bit of paper as well. But anyway, for some information on the M5 rail system that we all know and love. And so this is a two-piece, non-free-floated drop-in rail for the M16A4, and of course they also make a smaller one for the M4A1 carbine as well. The one we'll be talking about is the rifle length because that's, you know, the kind of gun that I have. And so this replaced the A2 style rounded handguards that you would find on the M16A2. Even though those are lighter, you basically have a little less ability to customize your rifle. So instead they move towards these Picatinny rails. So even though they're heavier, instead you get more options to mount accessories like lights, lasers, grips, things like that, which you can see I have here on my gun. Now the Knight's Armament rail, from my understanding, has a really good service record from being in the Middle East, but ultimately these got phased out as designs like free-floated handguards like the Daniel Defense RAS 2 came into more popularity, and the military started to move away from rifle lengths, at least from a mainstream perspective, and move towards more like carbine lengths, which you see in the M4. Still though, this rail has remained incredibly popular, especially in the clothing space, but unfortunately these have become a little harder to get. My understanding is that if they're not discontinued, they're at least made in very limited quantities, and because of that, they become that much harder and that much more expensive to find. So as you remember from the table that I showed earlier, it becomes a real pain when you actually try to acquire one. Now, even though these are mostly used for clothing, obviously because of their history, I still think these are very practical and very good choices to have today. They just tend not to be people's first choice because of the more, arguably modern choices that are out there. Still, Picatinny rail is a more free-floated. In terms of the whole free-float versus non-free-float thing, I don't want to focus too much on it, but I think for someone who's just like a weekend range warrior, just shooting casually for fun, like exactly like me, you're just plinking, I really don't think it matters between the two. Now, if you're shooting professionally or with any kind of precision where there's higher stakes than what I have, I definitely see the need and understand why free-floated rails, which won't impact accuracy as much for your rifle, are considered to be better choices. On paper too, all else equal, I do think free-float rails are better. I just don't think for someone who's shooting very casually like me, it is something that you absolutely must have and that your rifle won't work just because you don't have it. I think ultimately practice is what matters most, but I digress. I've always found the M5 rail to be incredibly sturdy and also very chunky as well, especially when you put on these rail panels onto it. Now, you really don't have to have them. I actually think the cheese grater feel adds to how tactile they am and actually makes them grippier. Kind of like when you grip the knurling on a barbell at the gym. Yes, it is rougher, but that's actually why it becomes a much more improved grip. I've kept them on my rail really just for aesthetic purposes, and I paid money for them, so I want to get my money's worth, and so I put them on here. Unfortunately, probably again, if you're looking at this video, you've already exhausted a lot of other options, and so while I don't have an exact in-stock place to get these rails now, hopefully what I say gives you a little bit more options or, is giving you a little more consideration of how you can possibly get them. So earlier when I showed that table, I basically showed you two different manufacturers of the same rail. So the popular one that we know is Knight's Armament, and also another one which is the same as P&S products as well. They both make the M5 rail, it's just that Knight's Armament happens to be, I guess, more popular for whatever reason. It has more of that sex appeal, so people want it. Now, I have not used the P&S rail itself. I do have one of their vertical grips, as well as Knight's Armament's vertical grips, and to me they are identical other than the logos. So hopefully that's the same for their rails as well, and that you won't notice a difference, but if you want to chase the name, I completely understand because that is what I did. But nonetheless, you actually have two manufacturers from where you can get these rails, which hopefully helps you in terms of options. That's Knight's Armament and then P&S products. Now, I did compile a handful of major retailers that I know, some of which I bought from fairly regularly and some that I haven't at all. So of course, Knight's Armament being the manufacturer also sells them, but Thoroughbred Armament also sells both the CAC rail and also the P&S products rail at different price points depending on what you're looking for. I haven't bought these rails before, but I have bought smaller pieces from them in the past, and it's been fine. My understanding is that these are mostly either new or surplus or military overrun or something to that effect, but correct me if I'm wrong. Now, Brownells supposedly also carries these, but unfortunately, again, they're out of stock. I think a lot of us know Brownells. They're incredibly popular, and I have bought many things from them in the past. I also mentioned Rainier Arms. I haven't actually bought from them. They're also showing out of stock, but I've heard about them a lot on different forums, and so I believe they're good to go, but correct me again if I'm wrong. But it's another name that I constantly see pop up. BCM is also a final one. Of course, we all know BCM, Bravo Company, and that's a really good, reputable manufacturer, or retailer in this case, to buy from. But, BCM parts usually aren't in stock, and so, hopefully you can get lucky on this one. Honestly, probably the faster way to go about it, if you're comfortable doing this, is just to buy from places like Gunbroker or Gun Accessories for Sale, which is on Reddit, or other sites like that. I bought many things from Gunbroker. Just make sure you're smart about your purchases, do your research first, make sure it's a well-reviewed seller, and then try to pay with your credit card as well. That way it covers all your bases in case you feel sketched out by buying from a third-party seller, but I personally have never had a bad experience in Gunbroker because I did my research. Unfortunately, again, no surprise, but I couldn't find anything at the time of making this video, but I actually did get my rail from Gunbroker in the first place. This was about 5-6 years ago, unfortunately, but that was probably the easiest route for me. And as I mentioned before, if you really don't care about it actually being clone correct and you just want it to look a certain way, my understanding is that Expo Arms and Midwest Industries also make rails which look very similar to the M5 rail, so you can also do that. And they tend to be cheaper from what I've seen, but I've never actually used either of those. The last thing you can do, which could be a little bit extreme if you ask me, depending on how far along you are in your clone build, is to just buy the rifle entirely. FN makes the military collector's edition of the M16A4 and the M4A1, and they come ready with those M5 rails. Now, the reason I think this may be overkill is because if you've already started your clone, you basically have to spend $2,000 really just to get the rail, and at that point you have the full rifle, but then you also have a leftover clone that you were originally building. So this one may not be the best option, but it's out there if you want to take it. As for the rifles themselves, I've heard they're very good, but I personally have never shot them. So I wish I could come to you guys with better news. I realize a lot of you have been looking to find the M5 rail, and I wish I had something more to provide. But at minimum, hopefully you can at least use these retailers as more considerations of places to buy if you haven't thought about them before. And honestly, as I mentioned before, I think places like Gunbroker, as long as you're smart with how you purchase, I think is probably the best route. These other retailers have been out of stock for such a long time that it's, just going to kill you to keep waiting. Anyway, hopefully this helps. Let me know if you have any other questions or anything else you want to know about the M5 rail. And again, if you have any other topics or anything else you want me to talk about with the M16A4 clone or my M4A1 clone, let me know. I'd be happy to make some videos. Thanks, guys. See you later.